this is James Hudnall and another episode of Creative Secrets, number 26. And this one we talk about villains and antagonists. And what we should understand first of all is that a villain or an antagonist does not have to be a person. It can be a thing. It can be an animal. It could be the weather. It could be the insecurity of the hero. It could be their own weaknesses. Whatever you make the villain, your theme will buttress whatever argument you're trying to make in the story. So your villains are not necessarily people, but they can be, and they often are. They also don't automatically exist for a fight scene. You know, a lot of stories don't have fight scenes. They don't have car crashes or explosions in them, despite what Hollywood may make you think. So understand that the conflict that the hero represents, the other side of the conflict, they are in opposition to your protagonist and your hero, but they also serve another purpose. They are the counter argument to whatever argument your story is trying to make. They are the counter argument. So they are the champion of the counter premise, and they are there to argue for the other side through their actions, not through rhetoric, although that could happen in your story. But ultimately, the villain is there as a counter argument to whatever argument your hero is trying to make. So let's discuss all this. First of all, let's discuss the old adage that the villain is the hero of their own story. You have to remember that the villain doesn't always see themselves as a villain. They may think that what they're doing is right or right for themselves. And they may have perfectly good reasons and explanations for why they're doing what they're doing, which is in opposition of your hero. And that's something that you need to know what that is. You need to understand the villain perfectly, because you should also see them as a person and not as a bad guy, a cartoon character. You should see them as a fully fleshed out human being, and they should be explored that way in order for the audience to relate to them on some level and see them and understand them for what they are. The story becomes much better when you can understand the motivations of the other side. Even if you totally disagree and don't like it, you can at least see why they're doing what they're doing. If you can't see it, they're doing it just for the plot. If they're doing it just because the writer wants them to be there to be the bad guy, that's bad. That's not good. I mean, it's been done successfully. Let's be honest. I mean, you can look at some Disney movie or something, and they have villains that are mustache twirling villains, but people see them for what they are. They're cartoon villains. They're not like people. They don't have the depth. And, unless you're writing a cartoon, I don't really recommend making a story where the characters are just there to serve the plot, because we've seen too much of that in our life, and frankly, it's boring. We've seen it all before, and usually it follows predictable paths when you do that. So I don't recommend it. Also, let's be frank, a villain does not have to be evil. They don't have to be bad. They could have perfectly sound reasons, like I said, and they can also have very good intentions. As we all know that phrase, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Some of the worst things that have happened in civilization have been done through good intentions of the people that made them, and they resulted in horrible results. So your villain can be a good person. A villain could be a hero in other people's eyes, but the point that you're trying to make in your story is why that what they do is wrong, and why it results in bad things, and why they should be stopped, even if what they're trying to do is good, quote unquote. That's something to consider also. The other thing, as I said, is that the villain doesn't have to be a person. It could be a societal force, such as racism, or something of that nature. And so it's not personified in one person, although one person could act as the avatar for the overall argument. So let's say you have all those movies about racism where there's one main bad guy that's like the predominant force in the story, that's acts sort of like a funnel for this abstract concept. That's one way you can do it, but generally that's kind of like overblown. You have to consider that has been done so many millions of times. But despite, I'm just using that as an example, you can use any subject that you want. You could use overall moral panic or fear or something like that, and you can have it personified by some characters in the story who are acting out based on that emotion. You can also consider that the villain can be a horrible storm, or it could be a war. It can be an abstract thing. It doesn't have to be a person. But then you have to deal with it from that perspective. It's extremely important to remember that the villain should be as believable or more believable than your hero. They need to be superior to your hero in the sense that the hero has to be overcome by them in the beginning, and they have to be a challenge for the hero. Otherwise, it's boring. When I say they must be believable, what I mean is that they have to be credible. In other words, they have to be a credible threat. They have to be somebody that you yourself as an audience member would feel kind of disturbed or unnerved by the villain on some level, knowing that they could defeat your hero and it would be catastrophic in some way. So that is something that you can only do if you create a character, a villain, that the audience can see as a real threat and not just some stupid, fake, phony, eye patch wearing guy with a hook or something that is like a cartoon. We need a believable villain. We need a credible threat because they are the gravitational pull that keeps the story moving. It's the force of the story is around the villain. The villain is the champion of the counter-argument, but also of the conflict. The conflict comes from the resistance that the villain creates for the hero. And so if that conflict is not believable, then you won't care. And you don't want your audience not to care, obviously. You want them to really care. You want them to be fully invested in your story. And so you have to create a villain that is really compelling. A lot of people don't think about their villains enough, and a lot of times their villains are boring and stale. You can see this in a lot of movies, even big ones. So that's something you need to create, is a character that is going to be someone that you can identify with. In movies where it is successful, where they successfully create a great villain, notice that people really love those kind of stories. They love villains that are believable in some way. A lot of times people can root for the villain, but ultimately they know the villain's the bad guy. But if you can create a villain that's interesting enough, that'll make the movie interesting. That's why Die Hard, for example, is so successful, because the actor Alan Rickman created a villain, not just the writing, but also I think the acting, created a character that people could really get into and believe. And so that's something you really should think about. Just remember this adage, weak villain, weak story. Your villain has to be superior to the hero on some level in order for them to be a challenge for your hero. So that's it for now. This is James Hudnall again. Please check my links below. Please like this video. I really could use the likes. I could really use subscriptions if you haven't subscribed. Or tell your friends about this series, and I will talk to you later. Thank you. Bye.